Hello, welcome to the European Open briefing for Monday, December the 5th. I'm Rafi Boyajian, currency analyst at xm.com, and we're going to be looking at the latest developments in the currency markets today. So, political events in Europe are dominating currency markets today. The euro hit a 20-month low after Italians voted to reject changes to their constitution, forcing the resignation of the Italian Prime Minister. Also, the referendum took place yesterday on Sunday, and we also had presidential elections in Austria, where the far-right leader who was very close in the polls to win the election. He lost to the Green Party leader, so there was some relief for the euro from what happened in the Austrian elections. We also had the resignation of New Zealand's Prime Minister, who unexpectedly handed in his resignations early today, and this put some pressure on the New Zealand dollar. And one currency that's benefiting from all this uncertainty is sterling, which because it's diverting attention away from what's happening in the UK with Brexit. So sterling is currently at near 2 months highs, and today we have the UK Supreme Court starting its deliberations on the High Court ruling, which the UK government is appealing. The dollar, on the other hand, is weaker against the yen, but it's broadly firmer against all other currencies, and this comes after another set of solid non-farm payrolls report out on Friday. And in commodities, oil is moving back up again after a weaker start to the day, and it's extending last week's sharp gains coming after that OPEC deal to cut output. So let's start with the euro, because we can see that big dip downwards, and this comes after Italians overwhelmingly rejected the changes to the constitution, which would have made it easier to we would have streamlined the country's decision-making. At the moment, the Senate has way too much power, which makes decision-making very complicated, and it also makes governments more unstable. Italians, the no vote was seen as more of a rejection of the current prime minister and his economic policies, because Italy at the moment has high unemployment, its economy has sluggish growth, and so that no vote could open the way for fresh elections, and could possibly allow the anti-establishment party, the Five Star Movement, to come into power, or at least have more control over the government. The Five Star Movement is actually wants to have a referendum on whether Italy should leave the euro. So all of that is sending warning signals, and that's having a negative impact on the euro. It did bounce back. The euro, it jumped back about $1.06 not too short while ago, although downside pressure is likely to persist given the more uncertainty coming up with the French elections and then with the German elections next year. There was some positive developments from Austria. However, the far-right leader Norbert Hofer, he considered defeat. If he had won, he would have become the first far-right European head of state since Adolf Hitler. So obviously that was quite a relief for the markets. Let's have a look at the dollar now. The dollar is just under 114 level against the yen. The yen is slightly benefiting from what's happening in Europe. On a broader level, though, the dollar is firmer today, and this comes after the unemployment rate in the US fell to a 9-year low of 4.6% in November. The data was released last week on Friday. Another solid gain in the non-farm payrolls pretty much confirms expectations that the Fed will raise rates when it meets on December 13 and 14. So this should hold the dollar for probably we'll see the dollar making further gains in the coming days. Let's have a look what's happening with the pound, because even though the UK Supreme Court is beginning deliberations on the Brexit hearing, the sterling doesn't seem to have been impacted by that. It's just about the 1.27 level. That's a 2-month high. And as if you recall, the High Court had ruled against the government that the UK government needs to allow Parliament to vote whether or not to trigger Article 50, and then the government appealed that decision, and therefore it's gone to the Supreme Court judges to decide, so that the hearing begins today, so we will see what the outcome of that will be. In the meantime, what's happening with Europe, that seems to be basically diverting some attention away from the Brexit woes related to sterling to, and that's because of the uncertainty in Europe. The euro is weakening against the pound. But also worth mentioning that last week we had some signs that the UK government is considering making financial contributions to the EU in order to gain access or to retain access to the single market. And markets were also very pleased with that, so that's also helping the pound make gains over the past week. If we move on to the New Zealand dollar, because we did have some unexpected developments, the New Zealand Prime Minister, who was he was basically did a pretty good job of helping New Zealand economy get through the financial crisis. New Zealand, along with Australia, is one of the few advanced economies seeing relatively healthy growth rates. He decided to resign after 8 years to spend more time with his family. His finance minister is expected to, he's the most likely candidate likely to become the next prime minister. So that did initially have some negative impact on the Kiwi. It fell almost 1% earlier today. It fell to below the 0.7070 level, although it's now rebounded a little bit to about 0.71 versus the US dollar. Let's have a look at some commodities now. If we look at gold, which is the yellow in the chart here, we can see that there was a brief spike up earlier today, and that was due to the the referendum outcome in Italy. So gold briefly jumped around 1,187. It's now fallen back down again to quite sharply, in fact, to around 1,162. So although there has been some boost to safe havens from what's happening in Europe, the gold seems to be affected by the stronger dollar at the moment, so that Italian outcome only had a very brief minimal impact. Oil, on the other hand, is continuing to make fresh gains. Last week, of course, OPEC agreed to make its first cut in years in order to support oil prices, and there seems to be growing expectations that non-OPEC countries will also join in and make further cuts themselves. So that's boosting oil prices. US crude was trading just below $52 a barrel a short while ago. Let's have a look at today's calendar before we go. We did have some Australian data, New Zealand data on business inventories that was slightly stronger than expected, and that also did help the Kiwi rebound from the resignation of the Prime Minister. We also had services PMI out of China. It rose in November from the previous month, and we are going to see the Eurozone final services and the composite PMIs released shortly. In the UK, we're going to see the first release of the services PMI. That's expected to come in at 54 for November, slightly down on October, and then later we're going to have the Eurozone Centix Index and retail sales figures, but the main attention will likely be the ISM non-manufacturing PMI in the US, expected later in the US session, and that's expected to come in at 55.4. That's it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.